you want is for superiors to look at you and say, we know what he can do. He did it before. He could do it again. Let's see him do it. That's what you want to see, as opposed to somebody writing your epitaph like you're finished. And that's the key here.
Come on,
Monk is not doing that as the new coach for the Cleveland Browns. I think it's wise because I think he knows he can always go to Shedeur Sanders.
Hold on. Stop scrolling. Stop whatever you are doing right now. Because Cam Newton just walked into the Cleveland Browns quarterback conversation and completely flipped the script on everybody. And I mean everybody. He did not come on here to crown Deshaun Watson. He did not come on here to write Shedeur Sanders off. He came on here to say something that nobody inside that Browns building has had the guts to say out loud. And the name he called out is going to surprise you. I'm Dre Fiver. Welcome back to Dre Reports. And today, we are going deep on the Cam Newton take that is turning heads across the entire NFL landscape. Because the man just said what needed to be said. And we are going to break down every single layer of it.
Hey everyone, we are working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoyed the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Let's start with the quarterback battle, because that is where Cam begins before he pivots. The question that has been consuming Cleveland since January is simple: Watson or Shedeur? That is the debate. That is the hot take fuel. That is the content machine running at full speed from every platform covering the Browns right now. And Cam Newton, a man who knows what it takes to carry a franchise as a quarterback better than almost anyone alive, comes on his show and basically says the entire framing of this argument is wrong. His point is that it doesn't matter who you put under center. His point is that you could pull the greatest quarterbacks who ever played the game out of retirement, line them up behind that Cleveland offensive line, throw them into that receiving core, and the result would be the same disaster we watched unfold in 2025. Cam is not here to settle the Watson versus Shedeur debate. Cam is here to tell you that debate is a distraction from the real conversation Cleveland needs to be having. And Dre's personal opinion, right out the gate, he is not wrong. He is absolutely not wrong. And the fact that it took a former MVP from outside the organization to say this publicly tells you everything you need to know about the culture of avoidance that has surrounded the Cleveland Browns for the past 2 seasons. Let's put the numbers on the table because the numbers are genuinely embarrassing. The Cleveland Browns receiver room ranked dead last in the entire NFL in 2025, 32nd out of 32 teams. That is the bottom of the barrel. And it gets worse. Cleveland led the entire league in drop passes, with 49 documented drops across the season. 49. You know how hard it is to build any kind of offensive rhythm, any kind of connection between a quarterback and his weapons, when your receivers are dropping nearly 50 passes across a season. That is not just a bad statistical footnote. That is a fundamental dysfunction that poisons every single quarterback evaluation you try to run. Dillon Gabriel's numbers look worse than they actually are because of drops. Shedeur Sanders' numbers look worse than they actually are because of drops. And here is Cam Newton saying what the data has been screaming all along. Stop blaming the quarterback. Fix the infrastructure around him first. And then there is the offensive line, the wall that is supposed to protect whoever is standing behind it and give him the time to actually operate. The Cleveland Browns offensive line ranked 31st in the NFL by Pro Football Focus in their final 2025 overall grades. 31st. They gave up 224 pressures in a single season. 29 sacks. Their tackles allowed a league-high 143 pressures individually. Dre's personal take, you know what that means for a quarterback? It means you are playing scared from the moment the ball is snapped. It means your eyes go to the edge before they go to your receivers. It means your pocket processing gets compressed because you simply do not have the luxury of time that good offensive line play creates. Every single quarterback on that roster, Watson, Gabriel, Shedeur, whoever is standing behind that line in 2026, is starting every game at a structural disadvantage. So when the hot take crowd comes on their platforms and says Shedeur Sanders is a system quarterback, or he cannot read defenses at the NFL level, or his completion percentage proves he cannot throw the ball accurately, Dre wants you to ask one question. How many times did the pocket collapse before the route was finished? Because I guarantee you the answer to that question explains a significant portion of those numbers. Now here is where Cam Newton goes somewhere that nobody expected, and honestly, this is the part of the segment that the internet is talking about the most. After laying out the systemic failures around the quarterback position, the drops, the line, the lack of playmakers, he pivots and he calls out Jeudy directly, by name, no hedging, no softening it. He says somebody needs to hold Jerry Jeudy accountable for his production. And he says it in the context of making the point that Shedeur Sanders is not going to say it, Deshaun Watson is not going to say it, Dylan Gabriel is not going to say it, because you simply cannot call out a receiver when you are a quarterback on the same roster. That is not how locker room politics work. So Cam Newton said it, so they do not have to. And let's be very clear about who Jerry Jeudy is, because this conversation requires context. When Jeudy came out of the University of Alabama, he was considered one of the most technically refined wide receiver prospects in recent memory. Elite route runner, explosive release, a first-round pedigree backed up by a Biletnikoff Award as the nation's best college receiver. The Denver Broncos spent the 15th overall pick in the 2020 NFL Draft on this man. Not the second round, not a day 2 value dart, the 15th pick. And for years, Jeudy's career sat in that uncomfortable space between flashes of genuine brilliance and persistent inconsistency that left teams wondering which version of him was the real one. He gave Cleveland what looked like the answer in 2024: 90 catches, over 1,200 yards, 4 touchdowns, a Pro Bowl nod. The whole package. That is the performance that made the Browns believe they had found their number 1 receiver and could build around him. And then 2025 happened. Jeudy finished the year with 50 receptions for 602 yards and 2 touchdowns on 106 targets. 106 targets, and he caught fewer than half of them. His catch rate sat below 50% for the season. His PFF grade of 58.5 ranked 72nd out of 81 qualified receivers, nearly the bottom quarter of all starting caliber wideouts in the league. And in the midst of that struggling season, he had a very public sideline confrontation with Shedeur Sanders during a game, getting in the face of his own quarterback in front of the entire coaching staff and both benches. Cam Newton, when he first addressed that incident on his platform, said it plainly. Jerry Jeudy is not in a position to question his quarterback, period. Not with that production. Not with that level of accountability avoidance. And Steve Smith, who spent decades in this league as one of the most respected and feared receivers to ever play the position, had already gone on record calling Jeudy a jag, just a guy. A first-round pick drafted to be the number 1 option on a franchise, and the most honest evaluation from a Hall of Fame caliber player at the same position is that he is an average wide receiver who teams will eventually move on from. That is not Dre's opinion. That is Steve Smith's opinion. And now Cam Newton is saying the same thing from a different angle. The quarterback is not the issue. The supporting cast around the quarterback is the issue. And Jeudy sits at the center of that argument. Now here is where we bring it all together. Because Cam Newton's take does not exist in a vacuum. It is landing at a moment when the Cleveland Browns actually did something about the receiver problem. The 2026 NFL Draft was Cleveland's opportunity to respond to the infrastructure failures that Cam Newton is calling out on national television. And to their credit, the front office did not look away from the issue. They used their first-round pick, number 24 overall, on KC Concepcion out of Texas A&M, a physically gifted receiver with explosive yards after catch ability who does not need elite quarterback play to create production underneath. They followed that up in the second round with Denzel Boston out of Washington, a 22-year-old who posted 20 touchdowns across 4 collegiate seasons and who multiple analysts had graded as a first-round talent before draft day. The Browns added 2 receivers in the first 2 rounds who, in theory, give whoever is playing quarterback in Cleveland a legitimate collection of weapons that simply did not exist in 2025. The addition of those 2 rookies also creates a very interesting dynamic around Jerry Jeudy specifically, because the front office's own words in announcing the Boston pick were telling. They talked about wanting the cream to rise to the top, about adding competition at every level of the roster, about not being complacent with what they have. That is organizational code for something. When the general manager stands at a podium after drafting 2 new wide receivers and talks about competition and not being complacent, he is not talking about the rookies competing with each other. He is talking about everyone in that room earning their spot, including the guy making $10 million who caught fewer than half his targets last season. Jeudy is currently on a contract running through 2027. He is not being cut without a financial conversation, but the trade market for him is real. Reports already circulating connect his name to the Minnesota Vikings as a potential destination, where he could slot in as a third option behind Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and actually operate in a role that fits his genuine skill set rather than the star billing Cleveland has been forcing him into. A 5th-round pick coming back to Cleveland for a receiver who has become a distraction, a cap consideration, and now a national talking point thanks to Cam Newton calling him out? The Browns might look at that math and decide it is time to move on entirely. And this brings us to the quarterback conversation. because Cam Newton's framework actually reframes the Watson versus Shedeur debate in a way that benefits Shedeur more than it benefits Watson, even though Cam never says that directly. Here is why. The argument for Watson is experience. It is veteran presence. It is scheme familiarity and pocket maturity, and the hope that a fully recovered Achilles allows him to recapture some version of the Houston Texans quarterback, who is a 3-time Pro Bowler and one of the most dynamic players in football. But Cam Newton's point that the infrastructure around the quarterback is the actual determining factor in offensive success cuts directly against the Watson argument, because Watson's best football happened behind a different offensive line, with different receivers, in a completely different system a half-decade ago. Putting Watson behind this Cleveland line and this receiver room and expecting Houston-era results is not reasonable analysis. It is wishful thinking wrapped in a familiar name. Shedeur Sanders, on the other hand, is 23 years old. He is the quarterback who gets better as the infrastructure around him gets better. He threw for 364 yards against the Tennessee Titans in a Week 14 loss that marked the first time any Cleveland quarterback had broken 250 passing yards since Joe Flacco opened the season. He did that with the same receiver core, the same offensive line, the same limitations that made Dylan Gabriel look ordinary. And now the Browns are heading into 2026 with 2 first- and second-round receiver additions. A rebuilt offensive line that was one of the most active in the entire draft and free agency period, and a young quarterback who has already proven he can push the ball downfield when given the chance. Cam Newton's framework says the environment creates the quarterback as much as the quarterback creates the environment. And the environment in Cleveland is genuinely better in 2026 than it was in 2025. That benefits the younger player, that benefits Shedeur Sanders. The irony of the whole situation is that the Browns spent the entire 2025 season deflecting accountability away from the supporting cast and onto the quarterbacks. Whichever quarterback happened to be struggling that week, and now Cam Newton, from his platform, has done what the media in Cleveland refused to do for 12 months. He named the thing. He said the receiver room is the problem. He said the offensive line is the problem. He said Jeudy needs to be held accountable. And he said all of that while simultaneously defending the premise that the quarterback question, Watson or Shedeur, cannot be properly answered until those structural problems are addressed. Dre has been saying versions of this since last September. It is just better for the algorithm when Cam Newton says it. Here is where we land today. The 2026 Browns offense has genuine reasons for optimism that did not exist this time last year. The offensive line upgrades are real. The receiver additions of Concepcion and Boston are meaningful and exciting. Harold Fannin Jr. showed last year that he can be a legitimate weapon at tight end when surrounded by even marginal competence at quarterback. The structural conversation that Cam Newton forced is the right conversation. And as for Jeudy, the next few months of training camp and preseason are going to tell us everything we need to know about whether he is going to rise to the moment or whether Cleveland is going to make a business decision that nobody in that building wants to publicly admit they are already considering. Somebody needed to put his name in the air. Cam Newton just did it. And now we are all watching. All right, Dre reports. That is a wrap on today's breakdown, and I appreciate every single one of you for writing it out from start to finish. Before you go anywhere, I need 3 things. First, smash that like button right now, not later. Right now.
Hey everyone, we are working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoyed the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
This kind of research, this kind of depth, this kind of no-filter analysis does not come from nowhere, and your engagement is what keeps Dre Reports at the top of the feed. Second, drop your take in the comments right now. Do you agree with Cam Newton that Jeudy needs to be held accountable? Do you think the Browns' new receiver additions are enough to change the offensive conversation in Cleveland? And most importantly, Watson or Shedeur? Let me hear you. And third, if you are not subscribed to Dre Reports, hit that subscribe button and lock in with the bell notification on, because the 2026 Cleveland Browns preseason is going to be the most talked about quarterback storyline in the entire NFL. And Dre Fiver is going to be here for every single moment of it. No filter, no agenda, just the truth. Until next time, peace.